Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Douglas Johnson, Chair of the Housing Policy Committee, meeting today on the 23rd of January 2025. So we've got, I think, full committee here. We've got a number of people in the room. We've got people potentially watching online, and we'll be able to check back afterwards. It's the usual committee here, so we'll run through the usual rubric around where the toilets are, where you know. In fact, we're not expecting a fire alarm, to the best of my knowledge. If the fire alarm rings, we get out as usual by following other people. Can I ask everyone to put their phones onto silent, like I think I just did? And then we'll go from there, really. So I think the first thing is to just do the introductions. As I said, I'm Douglas Johnson. I chair the committee. I shall go round in this direction first.
Paul Turpin, Green Councillor, Glebus Valley.
Councillor Penny Baker, Councillor for Stannington Ward and Deputy Chair.
Richard Williams, a member for Stannington Ward.
I'll just go to the other side. I'll come back to you. Oh.
Alan Woodcock, Councillor for East Ecclesfield.
Good afternoon. I'm Mike Chaplin. I'm a Labour Councillor for Southey Ward.
Good afternoon. Mark Jones, Burnby Councillor, Labour.
Mia Drazek, Councillor for Park and Arbourthorne.
And Alison Norris, Councillor for Woodhouse.
Great, good to see you all. I'll just ask the officers to introduce themselves sitting up here today, and then ask the other officers on the back rows to introduce themselves when they come up later. So starting off this side.
Hello, I'm Sherry Grant. I'm the Assistant Director for Legal Services.
Good afternoon. I'm Amanda Clayton from Democratic Services, Clerk to the Committee.
And I'll just acknowledge Alan there.
And Alan Harris from Dem Services, here to manage the webcast.
Thank you. Chris.
Afternoon, Chris Alison, Interim Director of Housing.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'll just ask everyone to introduce themselves when they come up, as you say. So if we look at the agenda, first thing is apologies, and as everyone has checked in here, there's no apologies for absence. Second is exclusion of press and public. I don't think there's any grounds for that, is there? No. 3 is declarations of interest. So does anyone have any declarations? Don't see any. Okay. Number 4 is the minutes from the last meeting in December, which you'll find at page 11 of the agenda pack. I think we just need to check that everyone's happy that they're a correct record. I'm seeing nods there. Can I take that as approval that they are correct? Yep, I'll take that as the unanimous approval there. Thank you very much. Don't think there's anything to follow up on that, so that's good. Thank you very much. Public questions, petitions and statements. So just check, to the best of my knowledge, there are no petitions, no questions, no statements.
None.
Correct. Okay. So there's none on item 5. It does seem to be a bit of a pattern since we introduced the new system in the council for a new, more complex system for submitting public questions. So it might be something to look at. Anyway, part 6 is members' questions. I don't think we have any of those. Shout up if I'm wrong. No questions there. Number 7 is the work programme. So now I'll pause and hand over to Amanda, and we'll look at page 19.
Thank you, Chair. There are no major changes to note from the last meeting. I just noted in the item on the decarbonisation that will be considered as part of the asset management strategy, as requested in the previous meeting. And I think that's about it.
Thank you. I think that is about it. So we've got the new items on page 22, which can be added. And can I just check what we said about the net zero thing? Has that been recorded in the? Yeah. So that's been formally recorded on the work plan there. That looks relatively straightforward. I think matches with what we expected. Any questions on the work plan? If not, is everyone happy to accept that? Shall I take that as a unanimous? Yep, we're okay, right. So we'll approve that. Thank you very much. Okay, let's get on to the main items now. So just to summarise, today we've got the new compensation policy, the older person's independent living strategy, the private sector assistance policy, and that will be all. So I'll just ask people to come up and present those. Let me just check. Who's presented the compensation policy? Darryl. Yes, I was trying to hint at Darryl. Do come up to the mics there, and Matt too. Could I ask you both to introduce yourselves so that everyone watching online knows who you are? Yep, thanks. It helps you've got your name cards there. Just give your roles there. And then, for our purposes, assume that we've read the paper that you presented. So if you want to give a fairly brief summary to that, that would be really welcome. Over to you then. I think Darryl first.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson, and good afternoon. My name is Darryl Smedley. I'm Head of Service in Housing for Neighbourhood Intervention and Tenant Support.
Matt Sutton, Service Manager for Tenancy Enforcement.
Thank you, and for allowing us this time today to go through this report and the proposed compensation policy for your consideration. Approval of this policy would mark a significant step in putting customers at the heart of what we do. Improving services delivered to tenants that enable them to live safe, well, and in great neighbourhoods they are happy to call home is our priority. What's important to note today is when considering this policy, that for me it makes a significant step forward in building that trust and confidence, which is what we've been on in this journey over the last 18 months. And that's about putting those tenants and leaseholders really at the heart. It sets out clearly what we will do to put things right, if and when we get things wrong, and so that it's really transparent, not only for tenants, but also for yourselves as councillors and MPs on behalf of on the behalf of your constituents also, so that you can better support tenants who need that. I think you'll all agree that this is welcomed. This policy complements the complaint handling policy. They should be read in conjunction and will provide that greater clarity for tenants and leaseholders in that sense. It demonstrates our commitment to meeting our regulatory standards as outlined in the RSH, Transparency, Influence and Accountability Consumer Standard, and also as set out in the Housing Ombudsman Complaint Handling Code and Best Practice. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Matt, who's just going to read through a little bit more of what's actually in that decision report and what's in the policy, and then obviously we would invite any questions from yourselves.
Thank you. So, the compensation policy ensures that we pull together in one place our commitments and position on the various activities of the housing service which could result in us awarding compensation. Prior to the development of the policy, the housing service utilised a claims for money procedure. This procedure was an internal procedure and did not have the wide scope or breadth that the policy before you has. By adopting a policy, we are ensuring that we demonstrate accountability and transparency, and this approach accords with both the Regulator of Social Housing's consumer standards and the advice provided to us by the Ombudsman. You'll note that the policy is written and presented in a manner that is intended to be both practically useful to tenants and leaseholders, whilst also containing the statutory information and precise legal wording that the subject necessitates. The policy is laid out thematically, addressing each area of compensation in turn. As I take you briefly through each of these, I'll provide a concise summary of what the theme pertains to. We have compensation for home loss and disturbance. These are payments we make when we require a tenant or leaseholder to move permanently from their home. Compensation following a decant. A decant is the term used by the council to describe when it is necessary for a tenant to move from their home on a temporary basis. Compensation rights for improvements and repairs. This section includes the right to repair scheme and compensation for home improvements when a tenant ends their tenancy. Compensation for damage to decorations and or belongings. This is the compensation we award when we are responsible for causing this damage. And compensation for service failure. This type of compensation may be considered when a manager has investigated a complaint under the corporate complaint handling policy and has found the complaint to be upheld. I'd just like to draw your attention specifically to this last type of compensation. For each of the other types of compensation, the Housing Service has an existing approach to these. This approach will either be set out in legislation or in the existing procedures and practices of the Housing Service. However, the compensation policy will be the first time that the Housing Service has codified its approach to compensation for service failure. This step not only ensures transparency and accountability, but brings us in line with our sector peers and the expectations of the Ombudsman. Finally, on the issue of tenant and leaseholder awareness, whilst the Housing Service will be in a stronger position should the policy be approved, the policy will only be effective if tenants and leaseholders are able to benefit from its presence when they require such remedies as the policy contains. To this end, we will ensure that not only is the policy placed on our website in a manner that ensures quick access, but we will also produce dedicated web pages to highlight the component parts of the policy and how tenants and leaseholders can make a claim. So, Chair, that concludes my summary. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that, and that clarity for tenants will really help tenants know where they are. I think it will also help our staff. Just looking around to see if we've got any immediate questions from members, and I appreciate that members have had an early draft there. So I'll take Councillor Williams first.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the report. Excuse me. It's really on page 52, compensation rights for improvements and repairs. A couple of comments. I was going to ask you to analyse what the qualifying repairs are. Then I saw the link and had a look at it. But my point is for potentially a number of residents, they won't have access to these links. Would it be worth putting that list actually in the policy? So, because, I mean, the way it's written, it's great. I can see what you're trying to do, making it a working document for residents as much as anybody else. But I think without a list, that they might struggle to know what a qualifying repair is.
Yeah, I'll just touch on that first. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Williams, for that question. I think it's a really good point, and I think accessibility for tenants is really important, and that's something not only in this space but across the Housing Service. That's what we're working on, not only through the digital offer but what people need outside of that, and that all links into the customer strategy as well on behalf of the council, and we're really committed to that in that sense. I think the issue is if we start going into from a policy perspective, if we put that list in there, it's a static list. We've got a live list there. What's more important is, I think what Matt's alluded to, is what do we do with this after the policy to actually ensure that this lands with customers and they understand it? And more importantly, do our front-facing staff, such as our neighbourhood officers, repairs and maintenance operatives, understand that also, so when they're asked a question, when they are actually out doing their jobs, that they can help and advise tenants in real time instead of thinking that there's an over-reliance that you have to go to a website or phone up. That would be my view around what a good customer experience looks like. So I think what we're thinking is how do we make it more accessible when we launch it with tenants, and this is, and unfortunately with all policies, they can be a little bit like that, but the detail and the key is what comes next and how it lands.
Thank you.
Yeah. A subsequent. Yeah, just in terms of the compensation, this is 6.16. As I read it, a contractor potentially has 2 bites at doing the repair, and if they are failing to achieve that after the second prescribed period, the compensation is £10 and £2 per day, up to £50. £2 a day seems a bit little, really, depending on what the repair is. Is that a nationally fixed sum, or is that just something that we in Sheffield have come up with?
Yep, thank you. Yeah, so we've worked with legal services to make sure that we've included the most recent up-to-date, legislative guidance. So yeah, it's something that we've not decided on. We've taken from a kind of original source.
Final, thank you, Chair. If we're having to pay out compensation for lack of performance by contractors, do we then claim that compensation back off the contractor?
So in this instance, because we do our own repairs, it's no longer outsourced. We have to use the term contractor because that's what's in the legislation and the statutory guidance, but that would often be us doing that work. So it wouldn't necessarily be a case of us needing to claim that back. I'm sure, and I can't give you a definite answer on this, but the contracts that we do have with anybody that we work with will have clauses such as that in. But this would generally be our repairs service. So.
I'll just touch on that. Sorry, Councillor Williams. Sorry, thank you, Matt, for that. I think with this, I think it's really important that it's in there. It is in that regulation, but I think the emphasis for me as a member of the housing leadership team and our aspirations to improve our service delivery is that actually we need to be getting it right. We need to be getting it right first time. These are fail-safes, and everything around the compensation policy is in that sense. And it's about where we don't get it right. I would hope over time, with all the performance improvement that we're working on, that you're hearing about in committee, is that actually these instances will become less and less, and that should be our primary focus.
Thanks, yeah, good question. Actually, I think it's an interesting question you raised because it draws attention to the fact that compensation isn't a substitute for getting it right first time, or at least the second time. Good point. Okay, shall I go to Councillor Jones first, and then I'll come to Councillor Norris.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation, and it's really good to see this policy coming through. Doug is absolutely right, it is important, and you're right there, Darryl, we do need to get it right first time. I've known of a constituent who we rehoused, and under the previous the contractors that we had before, Kit, the first thing they do is drop a load of housing felt through his roof onto his child's bed. So where we do get it wrong, it can spoil people's experiences. So I really welcome that. And actually, some of the stuff you said there, Matt, was really, really interesting, and that was where my questions were going to. So I'm kind of glad on that. It would have been maybe helpful in the documents if some of the wording had been put differently, like in section 5.1, where we're looking at alternate options. It was maintaining the position of having a policy only to address compensation, not actually give it. But you spoke specifically to section 8.3. If this had been more prominent, where providing an explanation, assistance and reason for why we're helping people and why things have gone wrong and what we're going forward there. Those bits that you've said there in the verbal presentation are really, really helpful. I think it might have been helpful if they were more prominent in the report earlier, because that certainly gives a lot more reassurance to us for our constituents and such like. The only other thing that I would then otherwise add, because they're more observations than anything else, the question would be, section 8.5 refers to the remedies policy. Is the supports people following housing issues covered in that document, additional to what's already in here? Because I'm not sure what the remedies policy is, to be honest. I'm not sure if you could enlighten us on that. Thank you, Chair.
So could you just repeat the last bit of that question again? Sorry, Councillor Jones, just the specific thing you wanted me to answer.
Yeah. So section 8.5 of the report makes reference to the supplementary document remedies policy. Is this support of people following housing issues covered in the document?
I think what that's referencing, sorry, apologies. Thank you, Councillor Jones, for that question. I think, just touch on your point, I think, that you made before as well. For me, what's covered in that section that you've just referred to there is essentially that catch-all. So that's where I would expect us, as a housing provider, to get better at being able to self-reflect, demonstrate the behaviours that the Ombudsman and the Regulator of Social Housing expect as co-regulation, for us to be able to identify cases where actually it's not, things have gone on for too long, so that we've got that discretionary element within this policy. So rather than us thinking it's gone to stage one, we might have answered a complaint and then it goes to stage two and it might end up at an Ombudsman. In my view, we shouldn't be getting anywhere near that. This helps us to get that clarity, not only for yourselves externally, but internally as well, to say we've got opportunities. That's why I never like complaints. It's an opportunity to put things right. It's not a complaint, and that's what we should be using that for. I think it sets out in there. So the remedies guidance from the Housing Ombudsman. So the Ombudsman doesn't say specifically that you have to have a compensation policy. It's good practice. They've got a set of guidance by which we have constructed Section 8 in there, which is around it being personal and being about the level of impact on an individual, which and it genuinely being individual, because if, like the example that you gave earlier, that might have a bigger impact on me than it does on you in your life. So we need that flexibility. So that's how I see that we can get better at genuinely compensating for people to try and put things right in that sense. But that is not a way of us sweeping that under the carpet. That still means we need to put things right. We still need to fix the wrongs. We still need to move forward with what that means as a service. That's just there as that acknowledgement.
Right.
If I could just reassure you specifically on the remedies. So we shouldn't receive an order following maladministration if we're following the corporate complaint handling policy and then following this policy if it's approved. It should reduce dramatically the opportunity for that to happen.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. Councillor Norris.
Yeah, I really welcome this, particularly that we're getting a standardised way of dealing with compensation in that broad sense when we failed in our service. That's really good that that's introduced for the first time. What I was going to say is we've talked a bit about how we're going to make it available and publicise it. How are we going to monitor that tenants have got hold of it, that they understand it, that it's working as we intend?
So we can do data-driven monitoring, you know, like how many people have accessed it via the web page, that type of thing. But we can also ensure that it's put on agendas like the local housing forums, TARA meetings. We've already been to the CATS panel as well and been back to the CATS panel. So in terms of, we can go away and ensure that across all those different forums, that it features on each of them. There's also measures like providing it in hard copy in neighbourhood offices and other places. So there's a variety of methods we can use. And we need to ensure as well that when we're thinking about the compensation policy, we're also thinking about tenants' access to the complaints policy as well, because one without the other is no good. So yeah, we will make sure we do that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Anything to add to that? And we don't necessarily need very long answers or long questions, but do add anything that needs to be added in.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Johnson. Yeah, I'd just like to add and to just give that assurance. Obviously, yourselves as elected members play a very key part in that with constituents. So we would very much want you to be very comfortable with the materials that potentially you've got in your surgeries as well. So we'd look at that, and we can potentially do that through the LAC chairs meetings, etc. as well, to disseminate that. So we'll be looking at that. And also, I think a key part of this is also is multi-agency partners and strategic partners. People don't always come to us, they come to other voluntary agencies, so we'd look at how we can engage them as well, so that they can be signposting people.
Thanks very much. Okay with that, Councillor Norris? Good, okay, thanks. I'll go to this side in a moment, just ask Councillor Baker to come in. Just, can I just flag up though, so one of the things that came up in the Tenant Voices Matter session that we had was the question of how tenants apply for compensation, and I just wonder if you can say at some point, not necessarily now, about what the route into that compensation is. And as I understand it, it's not really one where people apply for. It will only arise because someone's made a complaint or something. But maybe you can pick that up at some point. But I haven't done just the question you were going to ask, Penny, but I'll go over to you and you can.
Well, it was part of the question I was going to ask. How
explain
did they,
it better then.
But I was also at the same meeting as you were, so there you go. You know, how do tenants apply for it? And I'm sure when you communicate with them, you'll let them know. I, like Councillor Norris, am really pleased that there's going to be something standardised now, so we know what's going to happen, and we can refer constituents to it. I'm a bit concerned, you might get a bit too good at this and do us out of a job, but somehow we'll have to wait and see. I think Councillor Jones was talking about 8.1.5. Not 8.5, which was what was confusing us all. So, thanks for that. So, yeah, I wanted to say the two things. One, that Dougie beat me to, and agree with Alison. But it really is good that there's going to be a standard there, something you can refer people to, something we can refer to. I think it's a step forward. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Baker. Yeah, might as well ask you to respond to the question we jointly asked.
I'll let Matt come in, but I just wanted to, it's an opportunity to publicly thank tenants as well for their involvement, and that, I think it's, again, shows therefore the tenant voices matter. The tenant voice and experience and their lived experience is really important. So the fact that you're coming through and those questions are being asked publicly is really important. So that, to me, shows success in that space. And then I'll let Matt answer the question.
Essentially, I think it all depends on what type of compensation we're talking about. So I'll give you two examples very, very briefly. Compensation for home loss. You won't have to go finding that as a tenant. We would have, a formal approach, such as, the Gleeveless Valley Regeneration Project, where we've got officers that are able to do that. Whereas if we take compensation for if we've damaged your belongings when we're doing activity in your house, you might notice that 4 weeks later, so you might need to approach us about that, and it might not be apparent to us. So what we'll do is we'll ensure that the web pages and the other documents that we produce, it's very, very clear and not complex. It'll essentially be tell us about it, and then we'll get into it with you. So is that helpful?
I think that is helpful. Thank you, Matt. Right. I've got a Councillor Chaplin first, and then come back to this side.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Matt and Darryl, for for bringing this new policy here, which is very clear and relatively concise to read. What you do talk about getting compensation for damaged property, and I take it that it extends to furnishings. I say this because one of my bugbears as a councillor for my ward is that I do have quite a lot of tenants. I wouldn't say they're the majority, but a significant number who haven't taken advantage of the council's home insurance for contents, which is relatively cheap. It's a bit over £1 a week, but it does mean that when there is damage that's occurred, they're going to get pretty much full value, or the value of whatever was damaged back. And I'm not clear that that would always be the case under this compensation policy. So I just wonder if there's any way we can push what is really a very good value scheme for council tenants with their with household insurance. And so that because tenants need to understand that what you're doing is complementary, but it doesn't quite meet their needs in a way that a proper contents insurance policy would.
Absolutely. I appreciate the need for us to continue to promote that. I think where this compensation policy come in is, say if we're undertaking work in somebody's house to improve it through no fault of the tenant's own, and then through our work we damage decorations or belongings, we should be putting that right and making sure the tenant's left in no worse position. I wouldn't expect them to have to claim for any form of insurance. That's on us. We've caused that damage. So slightly separate, but we'll make sure we promote.
I think you've just hit the proverbial nail there. Because the kind of problems I'm encountering is where it's wear and tear of water pipes that have led to a burst, damaged the decoration on the walls. That's the wallpaper gone and the carpet ruined, particularly if it's from the toilet where that's happened, and I've had a few of those occur as well in my 7 years to my constituents. They then have great difficulty in claiming, because although it's the fabric of the council property that's deteriorated, which we're responsible for, it's ended up damaging their furnishings, but they don't have the insurance to cover it.
Thank you for that question, Councillor Chaplin. Just wanted to confirm the administration of that insurance scheme from a housing perspective does actually sit within my service. So obviously value your comments and supporting that. We've got approximately 10% of all tenants buy into that, which sounds 10% doesn't sound a lot. It is, you know, about 3,600, 3,800. And obviously, there are a lot of financial pressures on tenants at the moment, and naturally, something like that is the first thing to drop off. We have done positive campaigns around that. We have offered support in other ways to try and continue that, because we do value that both personally for tenants and for ourselves as a housing provider. And it's something that we do cyclically, and is discussed at sign up and at tenancies as well, and transfers. So we will continue to promote that, because I do think, like you say, in principle, it is a very good thing to have.
Thanks very much. Okay. It's a good question. It's always a difficult situation, isn't it, where someone has a pipe burst in the house, for instance, and it's not the tenant's fault, but equally it's not our fault as a council either. Right, okay, so are you okay with that question, Councillor Chaplin? Yep.
That was news to me, that it was the take-up is as low as 10%. I mean, I get that there might be a few people who get their own insurance from another source, but for only 10% of our tenants, it does suggest there's something fundamentally wrong, and it shouldn't be an opt-in thing. It really should be something that's there right from day one. Okay, they may have to pay a bit extra on their rent, but at least they will be covered when there's the kind of damage that's happening to particularly our older housing stock, which impacts on their furnishings. Thank you.
Okay, something we should maybe take away. Go back to Councillor Williams then.
Thank you, Chair. On page 58, and it's a drafting point really, I can't find 8.16. Was it originally there, or was it just dropped off? Sorry, it's a bit of a sad question, really.
I think that's a very good spot. I think it's dropped off because of the table. Yeah. We'll obviously correct that. Thank you.
Probably not the worst thing in the world. Okay. If we've got no more questions on that, I think we're probably okay to go to the recommendations and ask people to approve that. And if I can find where the recommendations are, yeah, it's very simple. It's on page 31, and it's simply to approve the policy that's been attached and which we just discussed. So is everyone happy to do that? Getting nods all around. We'll take that as a unanimous thing. Thank you very much. Thanks very much for your work on that, and we'll look forward to seeing it on the website, possibly linked, as Councillor Chaplin says, with a boost for the insurance scheme, so that it's clear there is some overlap there. It's a good thing to highlight. Good, thank you very much, and let's move on to the next item. So, we are going to, who's coming? I'm guessing it's Suzanne and Dan now. So, for the older person's independent living strategy. So, members might want to go to page 67 of the pack. And again, we'll ask Officer to come into place and to introduce yourselves when you're ready.
Hello, my name's Dan Green. I'm a Strategic Housing Officer in the Strategic Housing Service, and I've been working on the older people's housing strategy.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Allen, and I'm Head of Citywide Housing Services for the Council.
Thanks so much for introducing yourselves. Just ask you to go through the report briefly. Again, as always, assume that we've read it. It is available online. And yeah, over to you to go through it briefly, and then we'll take any questions that members have. Thank you.
Okay. So it's the older people's housing strategy. So I should just point out, first of all, we've had a slight name change. So it's down on the agenda as the older person's independent living housing strategy, but we found that was confusing people with the Opal service of the council, so it's been renamed the Older People's Housing Strategy. So it's a junior strategy to the new 10-year housing strategy. So it's helping to deliver the ambitions and priorities of the overarching parent strategy. So it's adopted the same 5 ambitions or themes, which are more homes and housing choice. Housing carbon emissions will have been reduced to net zero by 2030. Safe, good quality and comfortable homes. Great, safe neighbourhoods that people are happy to call home. And homes and housing services that end homelessness and support healthy, independent lives. So we've previously done a phase of consultation that helped us to draft this strategy with the public and partners. But the strategy, it will need to be delivered in partnership across housing, healthcare, energy and voluntary sectors. It's not something that we can deliver just in-house ourselves. The main drivers for the strategy are we have a growing older population and an undersupply of age-friendly housing, and that includes a very large shortage of specialist housing for independent living, which puts pressures on budgets, including social care costs, increases demand for health services. Also, one of the key drivers for the strategy is the strong desire for independent living among older people. So the strategy is focused on housing and support for older adults, which enables independence. So there's no statutory requirement for this strategy, for an older people's housing strategy, but it will help to address some of the city's long-term housing priorities. And under the Housing Act 1985, every local housing authority is required to consider and review on a periodic basis the housing conditions in their area and the housing needs of the area. So this means that local authorities are under a duty to assess the housing needs of their population and plan strategically to meet that need. So the development of this strategy will help us to do that. So today we're seeking approval to consult with the public and partners on the draft strategy. So asking the committee to endorse the draft strategy for consultation purposes. And then we will aim to analyse the feedback, amend it to reflect what people have told us, and then look to bring it back, the final version, for approval in summer 2025.
Thank you very much, Dan. Anything to add from your point of view, Suzanne, or are you happy with what Dan's presented?
I think he's given a nice, concise summary. It's been a lot of work. Well done to Dan and the other officers who worked to get us this far.
Thank you. It is a nice, concise summary for something that does feel like a lot of work, like you said. So just taking back questions from members. So just bearing in mind that we're not being asked to approve a policy today. It's approval to consult. There is a draft policy in here at page 87, but this is going to be very much subject to the consultation that we'll do. So we don't perhaps need to pick up individual words in there, or indeed paragraph numbering. Although that said, some paragraph numbering might be really helpful before it goes out for consultation. It does have its uses. So any questions on the general direction of this? Okay, Councillor Turpin, first of all.
Thank you. So I know this is a consultation. I just wanted to ask about when you produce the report, how are you going to consider the proposed Opal building at Hemsworth in my ward of Gleegless Valley, where there was strangely approved a few weeks ago at Finance Committee £2.8 million to Kia for phase 1 stage, even though it had been actually approved in 2021 during the year of the Co-op exec. So I don't quite understand that, but that was phase 1. They had 2.8 million for phase 1 of the development, feasibility, etc. After that, a design went ahead. I assume that cost further money. The Kia were given the 2.8 million. The design went ahead. Planning permission was sought and granted. The planning permission expired on Sunday, just gone, 3 years. They went to stage 3 and they procured the contract, also with Kia, £17 million, 2.5 years ago. But the building has not been built. There is no groundwork has begun, and it was for 81 rooms. Some of those rooms would have had couples in. So looking at the figures that you have for the number of elderly people requiring places to live like this, and also like a statement that that number will increase. So, I mean, I'm completely baffled and frustrated that that building hasn't gone ahead. And more recently, I've had an officer. We're not allowed to name officers, are we? one of the senior officers in the Gleadless Valley regeneration team stating that it's not now going to be available for an Opal building. And so I just wondered, given the vast investment so far that the council's made in there being that type of building on that site, how far we've got, and the obvious need, as you've set out, how will you put this into the report that you produce by this summer? Thank you.
Thanks. Dan or Suzanne?
Okay. Should I respond? Yeah.
Yeah, please, if you can.
Thank you for raising that point, Paul. I am looking into the exact decision making that has been made around the particular site that you've mentioned, and I want to ensure I've got the right information to respond to you on that, and I will do, and to the rest of committee. I think it is very unfortunate that it was our ambition to deliver at Hemsworth as you've described, and the process got votes so far a long way in, when both the costs and therefore the project couldn't go ahead in the way envisaged. It is part of that big shortfall of housing. So you're absolutely correct. There remains a shortfall of housing in a number of our areas, and that site was one that we had identified to develop as older people's housing delivered directly by the council. This strategy won't outline exactly where accommodation will be provided. It will set out there is a requirement for the different types of housing, including what that would have been sheltered housing with care, essentially. And we will, as part of the strategy, put in place a market position statement which says to all developers, including registered providers, private developers, this is the need in the city, this is information about how that could be met and what your role could be in it, and what can be funded through our own stock increase programme, I'm sure will continue to be reviewed as part of our capital planning investment.
Thanks, Suzanne. I appreciate that, and I know that this didn't happen under your watch, as it were, so which is why you're still looking for information. But, I mean, my first point I would make is that 2.8 million plus, I mean, that could easily be double that, really, because I don't believe that would have included the architect's drawings or structural engineers' drawings or any of that part of the work either. It would be good to get to the bottom of how much has been thrown at this project, and at this time of year where we're going through the budget and what savings can be made, to find something at the size of 2.8 million, you know, that would be a godsend if we could make a saving of 2.8 million. And like I said, it's probably double that what's been spent so far. So to throw that away and start again really seems very wasteful. So I do think that we should be going ahead with it as soon as we can. Also, just to question you slightly on what you're saying about that you won't be setting out where the things are that are needed. I mean, I'm not going to try and find it now. I did read it, where you do say that the coverage and supply and demand are not equal across the city. So would that be something that would be looked at in reference to this as well?
Yes. So we have an appendix in the draft strategy showing the areas where we think the highest need is based on the size of the older population and the lack of specialist housing in those areas. And we are going to ask feedback on that from public and partners to help inform by the market position statement. Originally, it was in there as well because the draft planning policy was referencing that the priority areas would be referenced in the strategy. The planning inspectorate, as part of the Sheffield plan inspection, have asked for that to be withdrawn now. I've only found that out this morning, although that's still not set in stone. So that was one of the reasons why that appendix is in the draft strategy at the moment, and in the final strategy that might come out, the appendix which references the priority areas.
And the other, so just to add to that, if that's okay, Chair, is that we are undertaking a specialist housing needs assessment. So as well as asking people what they think, we're doing the evidence base around when you take all of the information into account, what does the evidence tell us as well, where the shortfalls are, but also the different types of specialist housing that may be required, because there's quite a range that are outlined in the strategy, and that gives a much better idea to us and other providers of housing where the best opportunities are. But also within that specialist housing needs assessment, we're able to look in more detail at equalities considerations. So not only age, things like are there particular requirements from any groups within the community that are underserved at the moment.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Turpin. I'm just picking up on the point that you just made, Dan. If there is some very recent information in connection with the local plan, we should maybe just make sure that's addressed before this goes out for consultation, or with the consultation, to the extent it's significant. So, okay, all right. Go to Councillor Norris now.
Suzanne, there's just something in relation to what you just said, which I may not have understood correctly, but are you saying that in the specialist housing needs assessment that's being done as part of this consultation, that you're looking at other kinds of specialist need?
Okay. So,
because all it is I'm thinking I'd like to flag this up when it goes live, obviously to make sure people contribute. Make sure that people contribute. So if I want to target it appropriately and know who, if it's going beyond just older people, then I wanted to get that clear, that was all.
yeah, so sorry if I wasn't clear, thank you for the question. So the specialist housing needs assessment isn't part of this consultation. So as part of the consultation, we will seek views about where people think and what kind of homes they would like, because sometimes we think quite traditionally about schemes that must look like this. So we really want to know what our local residents think and partner organisations. But we've also got a process of looking across all of the data we hold and partners hold, and using their expertise across commissioning services to look at the different specialist housing needs. So it's wider than older people. So older people's housing is part of it, but it includes learning disabilities, homeless accommodation, temporary housing, mental health provision. So it is broader, but we always welcome people's views and insights. But we will be clear in the consultation what we're consulting about. Thank you.
Thank you, yes. Okay, all right. Councillor Chaplin. Yep. Okay, all right. Is there anyone else wanted to come in? Richard, Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I notice in your report that you say that the number of older people living in private rented accommodation is relatively small, but it is increasing. Are you planning to consult with private landlords about what the services they can provide for older people?
Yes, they'll be included in the consultation, so we'll be promoting it through the landlords forums and groups. That's in one of the ambitions about making sure safety, good quality standards in the private rented sector. It's quite a significant part of that, so we do need to talk to private landlords.
And the second question, if I may. I noticed in the you've done an area of assessment of needs, and Worrell comes up as one area. Worrell is a lovely place. I'm biased, but it's got a very poor bus service, and older people are more likely to use buses, as I understand, than the younger people, certainly as they get much older. How can that kind of matrix be kind of brought into this so that it does impact, we get some genuine information?
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said initially, that kind of matrix of the priority areas, it was simply based on populations and lack of supply. I mean, we also did look at a few other indicators, like indicators of bad health among older people and income deprivation as well. But that was why we were asking, we've got specific questions in the surveys as well, asking people about where they think it's, you know, additional accommodation is particularly needed to make sure that it's not that matrix, if it is included in the final strategy, it's not just based on desktop analysis, it does reflect what people have told us.
Can I just add as well, I think it's a really important point, and it's one that's been made at this committee before, that housing strategies need to interconnect and be planned in their delivery with other strategies. So transport strategy, for example, infrastructure, because older people still live there, even if there's no bus, and they need to be able to access amenities. So ideally, one would say, oh, are all those things lined up already? That's a good indicator for a site. But actually, we need to plan everything to make sure everything's there. And it's been very eloquently raised here before about the need for health services, care services. Can people get to a shop on foot, not necessarily on a bus, sorry. So I think you've highlighted a really good point. And that, again, is we're working, you know, we've talked quite a lot about external consultation today, but there's also that internal working about how we deliver this together as one council, but also with all the key partners.
Thanks very much. I think a really good point that you've raised there. So maybe that can be incorporated into the consultation questions. I just want to flag up another one, which is something that has interested this committee, and mobility scooters and or wheelchairs, or in particular powered wheelchairs, which are much more common now. Just because this committee will remember we've had a petition about that, where they got a certain amount of publicity, and actually illustrated a really tricky issue. We are due at some point in the spring to have a paper on fire safety coming to us, and we also have a council-wide equalities agenda. And I just wondered if the consultation is going to address it. I see there is a reference in passing to scooters in the paper, which is good, but I just wondered if we could get some valuable information from the public about their approaches and attitudes towards scooters, which on the one hand can be seen as fire risk, and the other hand can be seen as a lifeline for people's homes. I don't know if that's something you could include in the consultation questions.
Yeah, we're still drafting the survey, so we can do that. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, anything to add? No, that's fine.
I absolutely agree. It's critical that we understand what makes independent living possible for people. We've always said at this committee, a home is more than bricks and mortar, haven't we? So I think it really does align with finding out what people think and what they need and want.
Absolutely, yeah, I'm glad you think along those lines. Councillor Jones is thinking along those lines too.
Yeah, sorry, Doug, you just awoke something in my mind. It might be worthwhile talking to the planning guys, because I'm aware of a development that was put in for City Road where there was going to be a considerable amount of elderly residential elements to it, and they were expected to have external freestanding chargeable points within those developments. I don't know whether that's something you picked up with planning, or whether that's something that will be maybe fleshed out in this policy to make sure people are aware of what already does exist. Anything in response to on that?
Yes, sorry, that was an agreement, yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, yes. Any other questions from people, or shall we unleash this on the public and let the people tell us what we're thinking? Okay, can I just, yeah, let's get the consultation going. Let's look at page 69 for the recommendations there. So that's to endorse the draft strategy here for consultation purposes, that's set out there, approve the launch of the second phase of public consultation, agree that the outcome of that consultation will be presented back to us in the summer. Appreciate that might slip, as these things do, but in the summer. And then at the same time, a final draft of the strategy will be presented for consideration and hopefully approval. Is everyone happy with that course of action, those recommendations? Seeing nods, we'll take that as a unanimous approval there. Thanks very much for your work on it, and good luck with the next intense part of consultation. Great. So we'll go on to the last item now. So we've got the approach to the private sector assistance policy. So yeah, if you want to have a quick change of places, and if you want to come and, yeah, settle yourselves in front of the microphones, put up the appropriate name cards. Can I just get you both to introduce yourselves for the record, and then we'll just go to your paper. But yeah, start with an introduction if you like.
Hi, I'm Kelly Kafarsky and I'm Assistant Director for Living and Aging Well Short-Term Services within Adults and Wellbeing Services. So I'm responsible for occupational therapy, so supporting the delivery of the paper today.
Thank you, yes. And Rachel?
Hi, I'm Rachel McGowan, a Strategic Housing Officer.
And thank you both for coming here. So certainly for one of you, it's the first time at the Housing Committee, I think. Right, okay. So as I said with the other papers, we've got the papers in the agenda packs. Assume that we've read them. But yeah, if you want to introduce a summary of that and the main points of this, and maybe just to explain that, as I'm saying, it's really about disabled facilities grants, despite the possibly slightly misleading title here.
Thank you. So thank you everyone for your time on this paper. So this is about amendments to the private sector housing assistance policy, which covers disabled facilities grants and a number of other discretionary policies that we have to assist people in the private sector. And what we're seeking approval on today is your consideration of 6 proposed amendments to that said policy. And what the report seeks to do is set out those 6 amendments for your consideration and the reasons why that is required. So we've provided some background information about what disabled facilities grants are and the level of demand for that critical service in the city for our population who require support and funding to enable them to access essential facilities within their homes safely and therefore support independent living. All connects together our agenda items. And at the moment we do have a waiting list of 330 households, people who are waiting for completion of works, and a further 500 who are waiting for their assessment. So there is a lot of demand for this service, and within the service under Kelly's leadership there's been a great improvement in how those grants are both assessed and managed, which is a credit to our colleagues in social care. What we have found is that the level of demand means we must ensure that we are using the resources we have for the mandatory scheme and anything that is critical to support the mandatory scheme as a first port of what we must do, as opposed to what we could or may choose to do if there were more resources. So we have found that the funding pressures have been building up, and that as we are becoming more efficient in delivering, there is a risk that the requirement, so the assessed need, would outpace the budget, of creating a pressure. Now we did have some really good news which has been shared with the committee, that government has provided an uplift to us, which is helpful. But that helps to ensure we don't have a pressure this year, but that budget is still under huge demand, and there's still a requirement for very careful management of it and concentration on the statutory scheme as a first port of call and anything that enables it. So we have put forward and worked very closely, which is why Kelly's here, to ensure that the proposed amendments are the ones that will help most in this situation, and they are set out in section 2 of the report. Douglas, I know you're very observant on the paragraph numbers. Yeah, it is. And they are 6 amendments which we asked you to consider, which will, as I say, hopefully deliver the best value and the best outcomes for our customers. So firstly, it's to make sure the Disabled Facilities Grant, the mandatory scheme, is included in the policy, because I think that has led to some confusion in the past about why isn't that in there, but all these other things about it are. So that makes sense. The second one is to introduce a local land charge within the mandatory and the top-up scheme. The third one is to consider changes to the Accelerated Adaptations Grant eligibility and rename it so it's clearer what it's for. And the fourth one is the removal of the minor works grant. Then we suggest amending the purpose of the Disabled Person's Home Appreciation Loan, and finally changes to the relocation loan that we can provide to people if it's not viable for them to stay in their current home with adaptations to it or changes to their home. We have undertaken consultation with the public, and Rachel's got all the details of that, and we've provided information in the report about how these amendments were received by the public and their responses to them. That included both individuals but also key organisations who work with or represent people with disabilities. So that's the summary really of what we're suggesting, and clearly would be happy to. Have you got anything you want to add?
No, just to add that I think really this is just, it's been really positive that we've been working together on this, and that we've both committed to improving outcomes for people in the city. There is a rapid improvement plan that we've got in place that you can see is already starting to make a difference, which obviously we do report on regularly. But actually this just get further, takes us towards a place of really being able to manage this more robustly, and having the funds necessary to be able to continue at a sustainable level.
Thank you very much. As you said already, Suzanne, it follows on really neatly from the whole approach in older person's housing strategy, because I think we all know that the right adaptations at the right time can make a world of difference. And actually a really modest cost, isn't it? But all the same, your service is hugely under pressure. So, okay, have you got any questions on that? I know some of it's quite technical, quite detailed, and has been worked through in some detail. Councillor Chaplin, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome the report. I'm really pleased to see that the delays have been decreasing, so that there's much shorter waiting times now. Because you had an occupational therapy backlog of 1,500, and that's come right down. And so for urgent cases, you've got it to within 2 weeks, which is certainly a lot better than what you had before. So I suppose the question really is, how have you managed to achieve that?
We've been asked that on a number of occasions nationally, I have to say. So really, it's just been about proactively prescribing and using our resources in a different way. So historically, what we would have done is triaged people's calls at the point of us picking up the phone, and then almost assessing their risk at that stage without even seeing the person. But actually what we're doing now is we're having a really much more lengthy conversation with the individual, and we're proactively prescribing at that stage. So we are seeing that some people are actually being prescribed equipment, either using virtual technology, so we're able to do video calls. There's lots of different ways that the team are working, and we're continuing to build on that. We've also actually just been testing out an AI system called Magic Notes, which helps us to write up our assessments. So we are being really forward thinking about our practice. And yeah, we have reduced it. At one point it was actually 1,900 people, and I can say that this week it fell below 400, which is of great significance to the team.
Well done for that. It's good to see a good positive purpose for AI as well. Thank you.
Yes, lots of questions there, but yeah, so seeing that fall in numbers is actually really positive, isn't it? So I think we all know from casework that there's a lot of demand there. Right, okay. Questions? Just check, Mike. You're happy with that? Councillor Jones, then. It's all right. No, I'm going to put Paul to the back of the queue.
Thank you, Chair. I really welcome this report, and it's really good to see we've got an extra $750,000 to help deal with the pressures we've got going forward. I guess there's multiple parts to this question. So obviously you're working very proactively to see who are in there. And in the report it says about a quarter of those that are currently waiting for the 500 will go on. Do you think a quarter is right? Because that percentage changing could have a significant impact on the amount of positions we need to accommodate going forward. So that would take us from what, 300 to 425, possibly up to 500-600 again. That kind of puts us into the position where we were in 2000, where we managed to go through that many over the last 4 years.
Yeah, so alongside the rapid improvement plan for the team and our practice in general across the board around equipment and adaptations, we've also got a rapid improvement plan in place as well now about how we look at the contractors that are working with us around some of the work that's been delivered. We know that actually that does bring about some delays that are causing significant challenges for us, where we really want to meet needs in a much more efficient way. So we're also looking at that to see how we can sort of prioritise risk in a more efficient way, but also about how we work across the city with local providers to be able to deliver that in a way that meets the timescales aligned to what we expect to see rather than what we've historically seen. I think that will also bring about some additional assurances that we've not had previously either about the quality of the work that's been undertaken and the value for money.
Cool. And if I could, Chair, thank you. And sorry, Paul, still keeping you at the back of the queue, mate. You've already spoken about a lot of the efficiencies that you're driving forward, and that was going to be the cut of where I wanted to go, is to make sure we were doing it. But it feels like we're going in the right direction. It feels like the efficiencies, we're getting good value for money. We're not just throwing more public money at an issue with the hope it fixes it. It feels like we're actually getting there. So the only other thing I would say then, as a committee, is this is kind of under our remit, but it does cross-populate into the adult social care bit, and we'll be saving adult social care monies, I presume, this way, because early interventions in theory should mean people can live in their own houses better for longer and more sustainably, and that should be cheaper. So will we be able to realise some of that monies ourselves, or some of those savings? Because you quite rightly said, Suzanne, that we have got pressures going forward, but actually this is truly an invest to save opportunity here, isn't it, surely? So maybe we should be looking to get some of that money back to reinvest in the virtuous circles that this does produce.
So what I can tell you is that the demand through occupational therapy, even against an improved position of performance, has actually increased by around about 140%. So we do think that, unfortunately, because of the complexities across our city with regards to health, with the increased pressures around hospital discharges, we have seen a significant number more referrals that have come through. And that's across the board. That's not just equipment and adaptations, that's into first contact as well. So through our adult social care front door. However, what I would say is that absolutely early intervention and prevention is one of our key priorities. So as much as I've introduced myself today as living in age more short-term services, we are looking at my service area as a targeted response. So a targeted response to think about how do we reduce, prevent and delay needs. So my services are being reviewed to look at how do we reduce the pressures on the system, how can we make significant savings. And we do have some quite ambitious plans in place about how we think we'll be able to deliver that in the next 5 years. So it is absolutely a cross-cutting section, but I do think that we are going to be able, by getting that targeted support right, we should be able to shift people back to the left and a more community approach to meeting needs rather than service delivery.
Can I just add to that? I think this is again, it illustrates the importance of the collaborative approach across housing, care, health, in this instance, the key partners. And so you've agreed at your last committee and allocations policy review, where we look at, are we being as efficient as we can be and as fair as we can be about allocation of social housing. That affects people who are stuck in hospital or might not be living in the right home and do need to move on. Our housing growth plan will take into account the requirements of people who are disabled, who need a new home. So if we've got more homes that are fit for purpose, as well as the existing ones adapting, it will all fit together. And we work closely together, don't we, on the streamlining of it. Nobody's just one thing, are they? People are complex and they might have lots of different requirements, that the onus is on us to put that together for them more effectively and not work in silos, which we encourage our teams to break those down, don't we?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, really good answers. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. It's probably just what you're saying, emphasises the importance of good housing on health, and they're points that we'll no doubt make to all our colleagues in the health sector repeatedly. Okay, Councillor Turpin.
Thanks. Yeah, it all looks really good. And so a couple of things, and this may sound like a stupid question. With, you know, as the waiting list increased, so I'm thinking that it's down to you changing the ways of working and the processes and all of that. That's why you brought it down so dramatically. Did it get out of hand before? Was that due to old processes, but more? Sorry, you were able to manage this service before you changed the process because there was more money in it, so more people to work in that older, inefficient way. Is that a false assumption of mine?
Well, I can only comment because obviously on my understanding of it, I've only been with the council since November 23, so I'm fairly new to the local authority. But what I can say is that I think occupational therapy in general almost is taking a step forward into new types of practice. And I think we really want to lead the way on that. So we've got a really proactive principal OT that's in place. We've got a really dynamic service manager as well that's since joined the team. And I think we were all just really keen to kind of step out of the traditional ways of working and think about, you know, we need to listen to people and what they want at the time that they tell us that, rather than expecting them to wait for us. But there's also something as well about pushing forward with a strengths-based approach and actually understanding that some people can have their own solutions as well that they're able to tap into alongside what our offer is. So I think we've probably been a little bit radical, and I think that we have found it challenging in some ways, and I'm not sure that the workforce itself has reduced as such, but I can tell you that we have got things, and I'm always more than welcome to, you know, meet with people and share the information that we've developed. But even things like we've now got a dashboard for our service, so that tells us the number of referrals in, number of referrals out, length of time to assess, and it's got lots of information on there. What that also allows us is the ability to be able to tap into people's workloads and understand how long assessments are being kept open. So we've really been able to drive the performance of the current team forward with quite significant impact.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, it reminds me a little bit of some other parts of the council. Specifically, I'm thinking of the cost of living team, which are allowed to operate and change and be agile and reactive and learn by doing. And that sounds like what you've done as well. And it's good to hear that those skills are growing in the council. And even though, you know, your work is obviously in a very specific area, you should, you know, share that, because it's really valuable stuff that, you know, there's lots of skills that you picked up that can be used in other parts of the council, and we need more of that. Sorry, just to go on, can I just ask another actual question? I'm just wondering about the, is there any way, you know, if somebody either moves out or for some reason ceases to need the interventions that you've put in the home, is there any way that they can be reused, or either by, you know, taking them away physically and reuse them somewhere else, or can you influence the landlords or whatever it is to, you know, so that we get lots of families using them or something? Sorry.
Yeah, so part of my portfolio is also the oversight of the community equipment contract, which is a joint contract with the ICB. So our community equipment provider has actually worked with us over the last 18 months, and we've got a really strong recycling offer. So there's actually bins for recycling around the city. So you can scan a QR code, and we're on what 3 words as well, where people can actually find where the bins are to take equipment back. So that's kind of for your smaller items of equipment. But we also have a collection service that we're able to do. Yes, to stair lifts, they're also recycled. Our current model for the community equipment contract is actually based on a recycling model. So we get credit back for all items that are brought back into stock. So that's really helping drive the cost down. And I think the final thing I wanted to say was actually even the work that we're doing in care homes about audits and really looking at the equipment. We know sometimes, you know, things get put in cupboards, but actually those things that are in cupboards cost us as council quite a significant amount of money. So we're just starting a pilot project as well in particular areas with care homes to look at the equipment that they've got, and we're supporting them to return it in a way that, you know, we're not judging them for keeping the equipment, but we'd like it back.
Thank you. Great, thank you very much. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair. Keeping it short because my voice is going. Really pleased you recycle. It was one of my questions. I live with a gentleman. Well, my husband has disabilities, so I live with disabilities every day. I know the difference it makes to individuals when you let them to have access to another part of their house if you put in a stair lift, to the downstairs toilet if you add a handrail. You know, all this sort of thing makes a major difference. And to use an efficient unit, to have an efficient unit that makes the money go around, makes a big difference to extra people. Thank you very much for what you're doing.
Thank you, Councillor Baker, well said. Councillor Williams, did you have another one?
Thank you, Chair. It's really to do with Amendment 4, the removal of the minor works grant. I'm concerned in 2.53, the justification is there's no money. I don't think that's a good reason to get rid of a grant just because there's no money, if there's a need. And I'm just concerned and really looking for a bit of reassurance that by removing this grant, certain people won't be disadvantaged. Some of it is explained, but I really need that sort of extra reassurance that some people aren't going to miss out on vital help.
Yeah, so under the Care Act, we do have the ability to be able to apply up to £1,000 for aids and adaptations, which wouldn't necessarily come out of this budget. But I think actually we did look at the data based on historical application of this particular element of the grants, and we'd had no minor grant applications being provided at all in 2024, and I think there were only 2 in 2023, so there is more information available about that. So we did think it was a low risk, but actually based on the other opportunities that we've got available to us, and also things that we have developed more recently. So we've got an occupational therapy clinic. So when people ring, that's one of our solutions that we've put in place, where if we feel that we still need to see the person, but actually they can come to us, then they can attend our clinic at the Neighbourhood Centre, and we'll undertake an assessment while they're there and arrange for minor adaptations and equipment to be installed by our community equipment provision in a very short space of time.
Thank you, yes, happy with that. Okay, any other questions? If not, shall we have a look at the recommendations? And Councillor Chapton's just popped out of the room, but all the same, if we could just look at the recommendations, they're on page 149, essentially to approve the policy changes listed there, so amendments 1 to 6. Can I just check if everyone's happy with that? Nod around, yeah. Take that as a unanimous record there. And thank you very much for that, all of you. And you know, actually, there's a lot of work. I realise, you know, from going through the centre, there's a lot of work that's gone into that. What it does mean is that we're at the end of the meeting. Councillor Turpin's wish has come true. It's before 3:30, so well done, everyone. But yeah, thanks very much for this. We meet again on the 20th of March. But of course, we'll all be interested in. Between now and then, we've got to go through all the budget setting cycles, including the housing revenue account, and that will be, and also the rest of the work won't let up. But yeah, thanks to everyone else. Suzanne.
Sorry, just before you end, and I'm only going to be quick, I would just like to acknowledge the work of Rachel, who's who's absolutely led on all of the liaison between our departments and the research that we've done nationally, as well as the local information and the consultation. So thank you, Rachel.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's well-deserved praise. As I said, there's a lot of work that's gone in here, and it doesn't just happen by magic, or at least not magic unless someone actually makes the magic work. So thanks for that. Okay, shall we wrap up at that point before I say anything else? Thank you very much. We'll end the meeting.